Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Nicole Gelinas.
Good afternoon. You're all here at 4:20 on a Friday afternoon because you care about the city. And to care about the city, you have to care about transit infrastructure. Even if you only care about housing, we cannot fit 200,000 more units of housing into the city unless we figure out a way to get more people around more efficiently. And to care about infrastructure, we need to stop denying the fact that our increasing pension and healthcare crisis, not just in New York, but nationwide, is really starting to cut into our ability to invest in the infrastructure of the future. Now, public infrastructure projects do pay for themselves in the long run. I think we just heard Senator Schumer's long version of how this works, but the short story is you build infrastructure, the infrastructure encourages higher growth, higher tax revenue, and you use that higher tax revenue to pay back the money that you borrowed to build your infrastructure. But we don't live in the long run, we live in the short run. And the short run can be very long itself. In the short run, infrastructure does not pay for itself. And we see this in the Metropolitan Transportation Authority's latest 5-year capital plan. MTA has been doing capital plans now for 30 years. We've put more than $120 billion into our regional subway commuter rail systems. And it shows. It was when the MTA first made a bet in the early 80s to reinvest in the subway, commuter rail, and buses, thanks to the state legislature and the governor at the time, that the city's population started to reverse its declines. We started to regain population in New York City in the early 1980s. It is reinvestment in transit that was the first step in allowing us to rebuild the city, cut crime, and all of the other things we've seen since then. But we cannot keep doing this unless we start to deal with these financial issues. The MTA's capital budget has a shortfall, about $15.2 billion. Now, there are a few false or illusory solutions to this capital shortfall. The first one is that the MTA can just cut back on its capital investments. We heard this week from the Citizens Budget Commission putting out a report saying perhaps the MTA should not be focusing on its expansion projects. Perhaps it should retrench and just focus on repairing and replacing its existing assets. Now, the problem with this is that the MTA expansion projects are not very big. Out of the MTA's capital budget, again, $32 billion, only about $5 billion over these 5 years are for new projects, Second Avenue Subway, East Side Access. And by the way, by new projects, we've been trying to build these things for half a century, so they're not really new projects. This $1.1 billion a year that the MTA wants to spend on expansion, you look at this compared to the city and state budgets, this is less than 1% of our city and state spending. So it's really not very much. The answer is not to cut it back. Another illusory solution is that the MTA can simply borrow more. Well, if you look at the MTA's debt, it has doubled over the past, roughly over the past decade. They now owe $34 billion. That's almost twice as much as their annual budget. Actually, it is twice as much as their annual budget. They're spending $2.5 billion soon every single year on payments on bonds for past capital projects. And the capital plan that they put together already assumes that they will borrow more. They'll borrow another $6 billion on top of this. Even with this new borrowing, which they will already have trouble paying for, they still have this $15 billion capital shortfall. Another, in the last illusory solution, is that all they need is more revenue. Well, indeed, they do need new revenue, and it is inevitable that they will get some form of new revenue in the next decade. But that's only half of the problem. If you look at the MTA's history just over the past half decade, they have a new revenue. Many of you were here in 2009 when the MTA got its latest source of state revenues from Albany, from the state legislature, a payroll tax and a bunch of smaller taxes that together bring in more than $2 billion annually for the MTA. That new revenue is now 14% of the MTA's operating budget. So it is not insignificant. Another part of new revenue, of course, is fare hikes. People say, well, we can just raise the fares. Well, we are already doing that. We are raising the fares next year, and 2 years after that, it's going to bring in another 4% of the MTA's revenues, but still not enough. We really have to look at what is causing a good part of this problem, and a big part of this problem is unsustainable rises in pension costs and healthcare costs both for existing workers and for retirees. Pension costs are now $1 billion higher every year than they were a decade ago. Healthcare costs, and this is again just for the MTA, nearly $800 million higher every year than they were a decade ago. These costs, and by the way, Governor Cuomo just signed a labor agreement with the Long Island Railroad a few months ahead of election time that will not cut these costs, and this brings me to the final set of numbers here, partly because of the deals that Cuomo signed both with the LIRR unions and the local subway and bus union. By the end of the MTA's financial plan, 3 years from now in 2018, these two costs, pensions and healthcare, will cost another $500 million each year than they do today. What does that mean? This is money that the MTA could spend servicing another $7 billion worth of debt. There's almost half your capital shortfall right there if we could just say, today we're going to keep pension and healthcare costs from going up further, never mind cutting them back. So this is a real opportunity cost that must be acknowledged. Thank you.